Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. I'm your host Mike, and on this week's episode, we bring you Brudiclad, Telchor Engineer at a $100 budget. Brudiclad is 4, a blue and a red for a legendary creature artificer. Creature tokens you control have haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue mirror artifact creature token. Then you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token. All prices on this show are brought to you by TCGPlayer. If you're looking for singles, sealed product, or even accessories, please use our affiliate link down below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help support our channel and keep the lights on at BudgetEDH, and we really appreciate it. Another way you can support us is directly by going to patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There we'll have a bunch of different tiers that you can sign up for, including ways to make your own deck and have it featured on the channel. We really appreciate our patrons, and we couldn't do this without you, so thank you. Let's go over the stats of this Brudiclad deck. So this deck has 10 ramp spells, all of which are going to come from mana rocks and artifacts. It has 13 ways of drawing cards and 6 ways of creating copies, and I do want to mention that those copies are ways of creating token copies because we do care about tokens in Brudiclad. Then we have 30 ways of making tokens in this deck. That's the main theme of the deck, so we do want to focus on making tokens as much as possible. We do have 19 artifacts. It's a bit of a sub-theme in this deck. Brudiclad cares about artifacts as well. And then we do have 33 lands in this deck. While it is a little light, we do have quite a few ramp cards in here and cards that are able to make us a lot of ramp over the course of the game with using treasure tokens and things like that. So having a few less lands is okay in this deck. So Brudiclad cares about artifacts. So there's a very heavy artifact theme in this deck. And not just artifacts, but he cares a lot about tokens as well. So Brudiclad gives you a mirror token every time you go to combat. But then also the best part about Brudiclad is that you can swap all your tokens around. So there's a lot of tricky token swaps that you can do in this deck as well. You can turn all your mirrors into clues. You can turn all your clues into treasures. You can turn all your treasures into token copies of certain creatures on the battlefield, because we do have some copy abilities in this deck as well. This deck is very versatile. There's a lot of different things you can do with those tokens that you have to make this deck very fun to play as well. And then we do have some big baddies that we include in this deck that we're going to try to copy and then turn all of our tokens into those big bad creatures. So first up, we're going to go through the ramp that we include in this deck. And like I said earlier in the video, we did go with mana rocks. That's going to be your best bang for your buck in this deck. And all the mana rocks in this deck are pretty cheap and they keep us under that $100 budget. So first up, we got Soul Ring. It's one of the best artifacts that you have in the game. Then we have Izzet, Signet, and Talisman of Creativity. Best thing about these cards is they're all under that 2 converted mana cost, which you want to stay under with our mana rocks. Then we have Silver Mirror and Iron Mirror. They're both going to tap to add a mana to your mana pool. And then Star Compass is also 2 mana rock, but then it enters the battlefield tapped. Then we have Mind Stone and Fellwar Stone, 2 other 2 mana rocks that are very great in any deck that you play them in. And then we have Heraldic Banner. It does cost 3 mana, but it gives creatures you control the chosen color of your choice, +1/+0. And then last but not least, we have Midnight Clock. This is a really nice card because it taps for mana, but it will also allow you to draw some cards once you hit that 12th hour on this. And you can actually pump your mana into it as well if you have nothing else to do with it, and get those extra hour counters on this so that you can wheel and shuffle everything from your graveyard back into your library. So we are playing with Izzet, which is one of my favorite control guilds. You have a lot of ways of interacting with your opponents in the Izzet colors, and we did go with a very good and cheap interaction suite in this deck. So first up, we have Negate, Arcane Denial, and Izzet Charm. These are all going to let you counter spells. Izzet Charm is also a modal spell, so you can use it to deal damage to a creature or also draw 2 cards. Then we have Hornswoggle, counter a creature spell, and then you get to put a treasure token onto the battlefield. Confirm Suspicion is counter target spell and then investigate 3 times, and then Spell Swindle, you get to counter target spell and then create X treasure tokens, where X is the spell's converted mana cost. This is almost like a budget mana drain, very budget, and costs 5 mana. So next up, we have some creature removal. We have Reality Shift, which exiles a creature. Depths of Desire returns a creature to their owner's hand, and then you get to create a treasure token. And then Stolen by the Fae returns a creature, and then you get to create X 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens with flying. Then we have Release the Goblins, destroy X target artifacts, and then create X 2/2 red gremlin tokens. Chain Reaction deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. And then Crush with Tentacles is a card that returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hand, and if its surge cost was paid, you get to put an 8/8 blue octopus creature token onto the battlefield. You may have noticed a theme with these removal spells. We did try to go with ones that are going to help us make tokens, because that is what we really want to do in this deck. And the more tokens we have, the more dangerous our deck is going to become. As we start putting more dangerous tokens onto the battlefield, we can switch them all over. Next up, let's go over some of the card draw spells that we have in this deck. So first up, we have Thirst for Knowledge. It's an instant that lets lets you draw 3 cards, and you discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact. Fact or Fiction is one of my favorite card draw spells of all time. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those into 2 piles. Put 1 pile in your hand, the other into your graveyard. Trail of Evidence, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to investigate, which makes you a token, which is really good. Pirate's Pillage lets you draw 2 cards and create 2 treasures, which is really nice because you want to get those tokens, and this is also going to help you draw some cards as well. Pirate's Prize is similar, lets you draw 2 cards, and then you get to create a treasure token with it. And then Padim, Consul of Innovations, a legendary creature that gives all of your artifacts hexproof, which is really, really important in this deck. And then also at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, you get to draw a card as well. Then we have Reconnaissance Mission and Biden of Thassa. Both of these, whenever you deal combat damage with a creature, you get to draw a card. Joyer Weatherlight Captain, whenever you cast a historic spell, you get to draw a card. She's very powerful commander on her own. And then we have Skull Clamps. You can use this to kill your tokens and draw 2 cards. Idol of Oblivion lets you draw a card if you created a token this turn. And really important with this card too is you can pay 8 and tap it and make a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi token, which is exactly what we want to do in this deck. And getting 10/10s and copying them is very powerful. Tamio's Journal lets you investigate at the beginning of your upkeep, and then you can sack 3 of your clues, insert your library for a card, and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So let's talk about some ways that we're able to make tokens in this deck, the bread and butter of what we're trying to do. So first up, we have Dragon Fodder and Krenko's Command. They're both going to create 2 1/1 goblin creature tokens. And then we have Krenko Mob Boss, which is a very good deck in its own right, which I did make a video of, which I will link up above that you can check out. But you can tap them and create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. This card gets out of hand really quickly if you have a couple of goblins on the battlefield, and even if you don't, it's only a couple turns so you start getting out of hand. Then we have a couple of ways of making Thopters, which are nice because they have evasion. We have Loyal Apprentice. It's going to make a 1/1 at the beginning of combat each turn as long as you control your commander. Telchor Engineer comes in with a 1/1 Thopter and then also gives artifact creatures you control haste, which is really good. Sidemaster Thopterist, whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get to create a 1/1 Thopter, and then you can pay 1 and a blue to sack 2 artifacts to draw a card. Next up, we have Whirler Rogue. It enters the battlefield with 2 Thopters, and then you can tap 2 artifacts you control. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Thopter Spy Network creates a 1/1 Thopter on your upkeep as long as you control an artifact, and then whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card off of it as well. So this acts as card draw 2. Next up, we have a way of making some more flying creatures, and it's the Locust God. Whenever you draw a card, create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste, and you can pay 2 a blue and a red to draw a card, discard a card. And the nice thing about this is when it dies, you get to return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Sharding Sphinx is another artifact creature. Whenever an artifact you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a Thopter creature. And then Saheeli, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 servo. And then you can also use 2 loyalty to target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Then we have Nadir Kraken. Whenever you draw a card, you can pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. It's a really cool card out of Theros Beyond Death. Mirrodin and Besiege has 2 abilities on it. The one that we really care about is whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 mirror. And then the other one is at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard. If there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. Trading Post is a really nice card that has 4 different abilities, but the one we really care about is making those 0/1 goat tokens. But there are ways of drawing cards with this and also returning artifacts from your graveyard to your hand, which makes it important as well. Then we have Brass's Bounty. It's a sorcery. For each land you control, create a treasure token, so this can get out of hand really quickly. Storm the Vault is a legendary enchantment that is a flip enchantment out of Rivals of Ixalan. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get to create a treasure. Beginning of your end step, if you control 5 or more artifacts, you transform it into Vault of Catlacan. It lets you tap for 1 mana of any color, or more importantly, it lets you tap to add 1 blue to your mana pool for each artifact you control. This is a non-reserve list Tolarian Academy. Then we have Ugin the Ineffable. It's a very powerful planeswalker in artifact decks because colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. And you can also get a token out of this guy as well. Exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exile card in your hand. And it also can destroy permanents that are 1 or more colors as well. Henry Garrison's a creature that whenever it attacks, put 2 1/1 red human creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. One thing to note is that this is a card that can meld together together with another card, though I didn't include it into this deck because I didn't think it was that great to meld these two cards together. Shark Typhoon is an enchantment. It's a very powerful one out of Ikoria that has gone up in price quite a bit over the last few months since Ikoria's come out. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is this spell's converted mana cost. You can cycle this for X, 1 in a blue. When you cycle it, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. This is one of the best token makers that we have in the deck. It's going to create big evasive tokens that you can change into. And then the last card that we have is Mimic Vat. It's an artifact that has imprint. Whenever a non-token creature dies, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. You can pay 3 and tap it, create a token that's a copy of the card exile with Mimic Vat. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. This is a very powerful card for making really good tokens, which is something that we really want to do in this deck. We want really nice creatures that we can switch our treasures and our clues into and win the game in one turn if possible. And this is one of those cards that's going to help you do that. Next up, let's talk about some of the ways that we're able to make tokens of creatures on the battlefield. And it's important because we do want to have a way of closing the game out. We don't want to have to sit there with our 1/1 Thopters or with our 2/1 mirror tokens and try to win the game that way. If we can turn all of our tokens into any token, we want to make it a powerful token. So first up, we have Cackling Counterpart. It creates a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Cool thing about this is it also has flashback as well, so you can play it a second time. Quasi Duplicate is the same card, except instead of flashback, it has jumpstart. And then Heat Shimmer's a very powerful one in this deck. Create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it gains haste, and at the beginning of the end step, exile this permanent. So you can make this any creature on the battlefield. So you can steal one of your opponent's creatures with this card and then switch your entire team to whatever that creature is. And your creatures will not have to be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step, which is important as well. Then we have Rite of Replication, probably the best token maker in this deck. You get to put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of any target creature, and if it's kicked, you get to put 5 of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Stolen Identity does a similar thing. Put a token onto the battlefield, it's a copy of target artifact or creature. That is one nice thing to note on that it does help you put an artifact on the battlefield. And it has Cipher. You can exile that spell and then encode it onto a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to cast this spell for free. So Healy's Artistry is another token maker that makes a token of a target artifact or a creature, but it makes it an artifact creature with this. And the nice thing with this as well is you can make it any creature on the battlefield, not just yours. So we want to make big, beefy tokens. And we do have a couple of creatures in this deck that do go with the theme. Now, I didn't want to put a ton of them in here because I do want to focus mostly on the token generation theme, but we do want to have a couple of creatures in here that we can copy if we get them and really wreck our opponents. And the first one is Steel Hellkite. It's an artifact creature with flying. You can pay 2 and it gets +1/+0. And you can pay X, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. You can only activate it once per turn. So this is a big flying beater. If we turn all of our creatures into this, we're going to close out the game really, really quickly with Steel Hellkite. And then the next one is a Budget Eldrazi. It's a really good Eldrazi spell for how much it costs. It's Bane of Balaged. It's a 7/5 that whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So it says Pseudo Annihilator on there. And if you're able to turn a bunch of your 2/1s or your treasures into this card, you're going to kill your opponents really quickly. And they're going to have to sacrifice a lot of their permanents in the process. So this is one of the better cards to include in this deck. Now, there's other cards that you could put in here, but I did want to focus on a budget and I didn't want to put a bunch of creatures that didn't really fit the themes. I just want to include a couple, but any big creature that you can put in here that has an impact when you play it is a candidate for these slots. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch our video today. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Reddit. We'll see you next time.